Sir, your French accountant is lying, and he knew this was coming.
Sir, she said quietly, leaning toward Kang Min-Jae's ear. Your French accountant is lying, and he knew this was coming. Every head in the restaurant turned. Luc Moreau, his French accountant of 9 years, sat with both palms flat on the table, his face the color of old paper. Luc laughed, a short, brittle sound. Excuse me, Min-Jae Nim, with respect, this woman pours water for a living. I asked her a question, Min-Jae said, without raising his voice. Not you. He looked at Maya for the first time. Really looked. Black uniform vest, name tag slightly crooked, hands not shaking despite a gun battle that had just ended 8 feet from where she stood. What makes you so certain? He asked her. Maya swallowed hard. There was a dead man on the floor 12 feet away, and a bodyguard's hand resting on a pistol he hadn't yet decided whether to point at her. Because I've been watching him for 3 weeks, she said. And because 30 seconds before those men broke through that door, he checked his phone, smiled, and put it back in his pocket like he'd been waiting for a text. Silence. Then Min-Jae turned his head, slow as a tide changing, and looked at Luc Moreau. Show me your phone, he said. Rewind 3 weeks. Before any of this, before the gunfire, before the whisper, before the name Maya Brooks meant anything to a Korean crime syndicate worth $4 billion. She was simply the new girl on the closing shift at Maison Dorée, the kind of restaurant where entrees cost more than her rent, and nobody remembered the names of the people who refilled their water glasses. She hadn't planned on being a waitress. 3 years ago, she'd been a junior at Spelman, halfway through a double major in accounting and forensic finance, the kind of student professors wrote unsolicited recommendation letters for. Then her mother's diagnosis came. Stage 3, aggressive, the kind of cancer that doesn't wait for semester breaks. And Maya withdrew from school with 11 credits left and a GPA she'd worked 4 years to build. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself a lot of things that year. 2 years of chemo, 2 rounds of remission and relapse, a mountain of medical debt that ate every dollar Maya could find. And her mother was gone by the following spring. By then, the version of Maya who was going to graduate, sit the CPA exam, maybe work for the FBI's financial crimes division like she used to dream about in undergrad. That version had quietly died too, replaced by someone who worked doubles, sent rent on the 3rd of every month, and kept a battered TI-84 calculator in her apron pocket, out of habit more than necessity. But here was the thing nobody at Maison Dorée understood about her. The habits never left. The part of her brain trained to spot inconsistencies in a ledger didn't switch off just because she was carrying a tray instead of a calculator. If anything, 3 years of waiting tables for wealthy, careless men had sharpened it. Rich people talked like nobody was listening. They left documents on tables. They had loud phone calls in restrooms, assuming the help didn't understand finance, didn't understand French, didn't understand anything beyond more bread, please. Maya understood everything. She noticed, for instance, that Luc Moreau always ordered his espresso exactly 4 minutes before Kang Min-Jae's driver pulled into the private lot, like he was watching the cameras outside, timing his entrance to look casual. She noticed that he excused himself to the restroom at almost the same point in every meeting, always carrying a slim leather folder he didn't carry in with him. She noticed, 3 Tuesdays ago, that the printer in the back office, the one staff weren't supposed to use, the one reserved for private client documents, had jammed on a page that fluttered to the floor before the busboy fished it out and tossed it in the bin without looking at it. Maya looked at it. It was a wire transfer confirmation. $2.3 million. Routed through a shell company in Luxembourg she'd never heard of, with a beneficiary account number that didn't match anything in the legitimate-sounding paperwork she'd glimpsed on Min-Jae's table the week before. She didn't say anything. She put the page back exactly where it had fallen and walked away with her tray, heart hammering so hard she was sure someone could hear it. That night, lying in her cramped studio apartment, with the window unit rattling against the June heat, she pulled out her old college notebook. The one with forensic accounting formulas scrawled in the margins, the one she hadn't opened in 2 years, and wrote down everything she remembered. The account number, the date, the routing pattern, old habits, old discipline, old hunger. She told herself she was just curious. She told herself a lot of things that month, too. The following week, Luc Moreau made a mistake. He'd had 2 glasses of Bordeaux during a meeting that ran long, waiting for a courier who was late, and he stepped into the alcove near the wine cellar to take a phone call he clearly thought was private. Maya was restocking napkins 8 feet away, invisible in the way service staff are always invisible to men who've spent their whole lives being served. He spoke in French, fast, low, urgent. Non, non, écoute-moi, avant que le vieux tigre ne s'en rende compte, il faut que tout soit transféré. Tout! Compris? Before the old tiger realizes, everything needs to be transferred. Everything. Understood? Maya had taken 4 years of French in high school and 2 semesters in college because her advisor told her. International finance would demand it. She'd never imagined it would save her life. She kept folding napkins, eyes down, pulse roaring in her ears. Luc lowered his voice further. Demain soir, pendant la signature, c'est notre dernière chance. Tomorrow night, during the signing, it's our last chance. Then he laughed, an oily, satisfied sound, and said something that made Maya's blood go cold even though she only caught the last 3 words clearly. Il signera sa propre execution. He will sign his own execution. Maya finished folding the napkin in her hands with fingers that had gone numb. She did not look up. She did not let her face change. She had learned over 3 years of serving men who could end careers with a phone call, exactly how to disappear in plain sight. But that night, she didn't sleep at all. This was no longer about a man skimming money from his employer. Men stole from each other constantly. She'd seen enough of that in 3 weeks to fill a notebook. This was something else. The old tiger, a signing, an execution. She didn't know yet who the old tiger was. She would find out 4 days later when she heard one of the bodyguards address Kang Min-Jae by the nickname directly, a joke about his temper, quickly silenced by a glare. And the pieces clicked together with the cold, sick clarity of a verified hypothesis. The man Luc Moreau was planning to betray, possibly to kill, was the most powerful organized crime figure on the East Coast. And Maya Brooks was the only person in the building who knew it. She almost told someone. She almost told everyone. She thought about calling the police, then remembered that the police in this city had, on at least 2 occasions she knew of from regulars' gossip, been paid handsomely to look the other way when it came to anything connected to Min-Jae's businesses. She thought about quitting outright, walking away, pretending she'd never overheard a word of French in a wine cellar. 3 years of survival instinct screamed at her to do exactly that. Keep your head down, take the tip money, mind nobody's business but your own. But there was a version of Maya that still existed underneath the waitress uniform. The version who used to stay up until 3 a.m., solving forensic case studies for fun, who used to tell her mother that someday she'd be the person who caught the people nobody else could catch. That version of Maya looked at the choice in front of her. Stay silent and let a man die, or speak and risk everything, and could not make herself choose silence. Her coworker Denise noticed something was wrong almost immediately. "You've been weird all week," Denise said, leaning against the prep counter during their 5-minute break, peeling an orange with the kind of unhurried efficiency that came from a decade in the restaurant business. "You're not sleeping. What is it?" "Nothing," Maya said. Denise gave her a long look. "Girl, I've worked this floor for 11 years. I know what scared looks like on a person. You think I don't recognize it?" Maya hesitated. Then carefully, leaving out names, leaving out specifics, testing the waters, she said, "What if you saw something? Something bad? Something that wasn't your business, but if you didn't say anything, somebody could get hurt." Denise's peeling slowed. She didn't look up. "You're talking about the Korean guy's table." Maya's stomach dropped. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Denise finally met her eyes, and for the first time in 3 weeks of working together, there was no warmth in her expression. Only a hard, frightened seriousness Maya had never seen on her before. "Listen to me. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you think you know, you let it go. You hear me? People who get curious about that table don't get promoted. They disappear. I've seen it happen to a sommelier who asked one too many questions about a wine order 3 years ago. Nobody talks about him anymore because there's nothing to talk about. He's just gone. So I should just let someone get hurt? You should let someone else's business stay someone else's business," Denise snapped, voice low and urgent. "You've got rent. You've got a life. You think these people care about justice? They care about money and they care about loyalty, and you're neither rich enough nor connected enough to matter to either side. Walk away, Maya. I mean it, for your own good." Maya didn't sleep that night either. She thought about her mother, about the version of herself that had wanted more than anything to be someone who used numbers to protect people instead of someone who got crushed beneath them. She thought about Denise's warning, about the sommelier who vanished, about every reasonable, sensible argument for staying silent. And then she thought about a man, whoever Luke Moreau's old tiger really was, sitting down at a table tomorrow night to sign documents that would, by his own accountant's gleeful admission, amount to his own execution. She almost quit. She drafted the text message to her manager 3 different times. Each time, her thumb hovered over send, and each time, she thought about the look on Luke's face when he laughed in French, certain nobody around him could understand a word. She deleted the message the 3rd time and went to work for her final shift instead. She had 18 hours to decide exactly how and whether she was going to stop a murder she wasn't even supposed to know about. Before we get into what happened next, if this story has already pulled you in, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more waiting for you, and you won't want to miss how deep this rabbit hole really goes. Back in the present, in a restaurant that still smelled of gunpowder and spilled Bordeaux, Luke Moreau set his phone down on the white tablecloth with hands that had begun, finally, to shake. Kang Min-Jae did not touch it. He simply looked at it, then at Luke, then, for a second time, at Maya. "Read it," Min-Jae said to her. Maya hesitated. The phone screen showed a single text message, received 4 minutes before the shooting began, written in French. She read it aloud, translating as she went, her voice steady even though her hands were not. It says, "They're 3 minutes out. Make sure you're seated when it happens. Don't react." The dining room had gone utterly silent, except for the soft groan of a wounded intruder being dragged toward the kitchen. That's nothing," Luke said too fast. "A friend warning me about traffic, about a delivery. I don't even remember sending." "You didn't send it," Min-Jae said quietly. "You received it. And then you smiled." One of the bodyguards, a broad-shouldered man Maya had heard others call Tai Sung, stepped forward and picked the phone up off the table without asking permission. He began scrolling. "Min-Jae Nim," Tai Sung said after a moment, his voice flat and careful. "There are messages going back 6 weeks, coordinates, times, references to the package and the asset." He looked up. "I think we were the package." Luke's composure finally broke entirely. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything, I swear to you. 9 years. 9 years I have worked for you." 9 years, Min-Jae repeated almost gently. during which you apparently decided I was worth more dead than employed." He turned his attention fully to Maya now, and something in his expression shifted. Not warmth, not yet, but a kind of sharp, assessing curiosity she would come to know well over the following weeks. "You said 3 weeks. You've known for 3 weeks?" "I suspected for 3 weeks," Maya said carefully. "I confirmed pieces of it as I went. I wasn't completely sure until tonight, when I saw him check his phone right before the attack. And you said nothing until 30 seconds before men with rifles broke through that door." It wasn't a question, but Maya answered it like one. "I didn't know exactly when it would happen. I knew it would happen during the signing. I thought I had more time to figure out how to tell you without getting both of us killed." A muscle worked in Min-Jae's jaw, something between anger and reluctant respect. "You should have come to me the moment you suspected." "With respect, sir," Maya said, and her voice did not waver even though every instinct in her body told her to stop talking. "If I'd walked up to your table 3 weeks ago and told you your accountant was stealing from you and planning your murder, would you have believed a waitress, or would you have assumed I was the threat?" For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Kang Min-Jae did something none of his men had seen him do in longer than they could remember. He laughed, a short, surprised bark of genuine amusement, utterly out of place amid broken glass and a man dying slowly by the kitchen door. "No," he admitted. "I would not have believed you. I would have had you removed from the building and never thought of you again." He stood, smoothing the front of his suit jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who refused to let chaos dictate his posture. "Which means you saved my life twice tonight. Once by speaking when you did, and once 3 weeks ago by being patient enough to be right." He turned to Taesung. "Take Moreau to the car. Quietly, we'll discuss his contributions somewhere more private." Luke began to protest, then thought better of it when 2 more bodyguards closed in on either side of him. He was marched out through the kitchen, ashen-faced, muttering something in French that Maya didn't bother translating. Min-Jae watched him go, then turned back to Maya, studying her the way a man studies a chess piece that has just moved somewhere unexpected and useful. "What's your name?" "Maya Brooks." "Maya Brooks," he repeated, as though testing the weight of it. "You said you confirmed pieces of this as you went. What pieces?" And so, standing in the wreckage of a restaurant that 30 minutes earlier had been preparing to host the largest financial deal of Kang Min-Jae's career, Maya Brooks began to explain, calmly, methodically, the way she used to explain case studies to professors who'd long ago given up expecting that level of clarity from a 20-year-old. She told him about the wire transfer she'd seen on the jammed printout, the Luxembourg shell company, the mismatched beneficiary account, the pattern of small, almost invisible discrepancies in currency conversion that individually meant nothing but collectively, over 18 months, suggested a slow and deliberate siphoning of funds disguised as rounding errors. "He's been skimming maybe 1.5% off every conversion," Maya said. "On its own, nobody audits that. It looks like exchange rate fluctuation. But across the volume you're moving, that's not pocket change. That's millions. And it's been going on for at least a year, probably longer." Min-Jae's expression had gone very still. "How much?" "I can't be sure without seeing real numbers instead of scraps off a printer. But if my estimate is even close, we're talking somewhere between $40 and $60 million. Possibly more." One of the senior bodyguards, an older man with a scar through one eyebrow, whom the others called Director O, made a low sound of disbelief. "Min-Jae Nim, this is absurd. We cannot take financial counsel from a waitress who just told us our own accountant intended to murder me tonight," Min-Jae said without raising his voice, and Director O fell silent. Min-Jae returned his attention to Maya. You said tonight's deal was supposed to be the execution. Explain that to me plainly. What was actually going to happen? Maya took a breath. This was the part she'd pieced together only in fragments, and she chose her words carefully, unwilling to overstate her certainty. I think the gunmen tonight were never meant to kill you during the meeting. I think the meeting itself, the legitimate-looking deal you came here to sign, was designed to keep you seated, distracted, surrounded by your own people in a location that looked secure but had already been compromised. The attack was the real plan. Luke's job was just to make sure you didn't see it coming. He probably wasn't even supposed to survive past tonight either, if I'm honest. Men like that rarely get to enjoy the money they help steal. Director O opened his mouth to argue again, then closed it. Min-Jae was quiet for a long moment, looking at the bullet holes stitched across the far wall, at the dead man whose blood was already drying dark against pale marble. You understand, he said finally, that what you've just done, exposing Moreau publicly in front of my men, has made you a target. Whoever orchestrated this attack now knows that you know more than you should. They will not simply let that go. I figured that out about 30 seconds after I opened my mouth, Maya said with a dry edge that surprised even her. Something that might almost have been the start of a smile touched the corner of Min-Jae's mouth before vanishing. Then we should leave, now, before whoever planned tonight realizes their first attempt failed and decides to try again with less subtlety. Min-Jae Nim, Tai-sung said, returning from the kitchen, voice tight. The captured shooter. He's not talking, but I found something on him. A second target list. He held out a phone in a gloved hand. Min-Jae took it, scrolled once, and his expression, calm through gunfire, calm through betrayal, finally cracked into something sharper. What is it? Maya asked. Min-Jae turned the screen toward her without a word. The second name on the list, beneath his own, was hers. Maya Brooks, Waitress. Eliminate if she interferes. They knew about you, Min-Jae said quietly, before tonight even started. The parking garage beneath Maison Dorée was supposed to be the safest place in the building. Reinforced concrete, biometric access, 4 cameras covering every angle, and at least 6 of Min-Jae's men stationed at the exits. It took less than 90 seconds for Maya to learn that safe was a word that meant nothing once someone had already infiltrated your security from the inside. They were halfway to the armored sedan, Min-Jae's hand firm but not unkind on Maya's shoulder, steering her forward between 2 bodyguards, when the first shot rang out from the shadows behind a concrete support pillar. It missed Min-Jae by inches, taking a chunk out of the pillar instead, and chaos erupted in the enclosed space with a violence that made the restaurant shooting look almost tame by comparison. Gunfire echoed off concrete from at least 3 directions. Tae-sung shoved Maya bodily behind an SUV, his own weapon already raised, shouting something in Korean that she didn't need translated to understand. Get down, get down. Maya pressed herself flat against cold concrete, ears ringing, watching through the gap beneath the vehicle's chassis, as muzzle flashes lit the dark in quick, ugly bursts. She had never in her life heard gunfire this close. It didn't sound like movies. It sounded like the world tearing. A man in black tactical gear rounded the front of the SUV she was hiding behind, weapon sweeping low, clearly searching. Not for Min-Jae, whose security detail had already formed a wall around him and was returning fire with brutal efficiency, but for someone smaller, someone alone. He was looking for her. Maya's whole body went cold with a kind of clarity she'd never experienced before. She had maybe 2 seconds before he rounded the bumper and saw her crouched against the rear tire. There was nothing within reach to use as a weapon. No gun, no knife, nothing but a discarded tire iron lying near a drainage grate 8 feet away. Too far to reach in time. She didn't move toward it. Instead, with the strange, detached calm of someone whose mind had already accepted she might die in the next 5 seconds, she did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a fire extinguisher mounted on the pillar beside her, twisted the pin, and as the gunman's shadow fell across the gap beneath the SUV, she swung around the bumper and emptied it directly into his face. He staggered back, momentarily blinded, firing wildly into the white cloud. And that half-second of confusion was all Tae-sung needed. He put 2 rounds into the man's chest from 11 feet away, and the gunman collapsed against the concrete, weapon clattering from his hand. The garage fell into a ragged, smoke-tinged silence. 3 more attackers lay dead or dying near the entrance ramp. One of Min-Jae's men was down, clutching his shoulder, cursing steadily in Korean, while another applied pressure to the wound. Min-Jae crossed the garage in long strides and crouched beside Maya, who was still pressed against the SUV, fire extinguisher trembling in both hands, chest heaving. "You're hurt?" he asked, scanning her quickly. "No," she managed. "No, I think I'm okay." He looked at the empty fire extinguisher in her hands, then at the unconscious man sprawled 6 feet away, and something flickered across his face that Maya couldn't quite name. Not amusement exactly, but close to it, buried beneath the genuine alarm of a man who had just watched 2 attempts on his life inside of an hour. "Remind me," he said quietly, helping her to her feet, "never to underestimate a woman who works in a restaurant." The man Maya had blinded stirred weakly on the ground, and before anyone could stop him, he managed 3 words through bloodied, cracked lips. Words meant for no one in particular, the last defiant act of a man who knew he wasn't walking away from this garage. "The Frenchman isn't the real." He never finished the sentence. His eyes rolled back, and Tae-sung checked his pulse, then shook his head once. Min-Jae stood very still, looking down at the body. "Not the real what?" he said softly, to no one. Then, to Maya, "Get in the car, now. We need to talk somewhere that isn't full of dead men." If you're enjoying this story so far, do me a favor and drop a comment below telling me what you think is really going on. I read every single one, and trust me, this story still has several turns left that nobody sees coming. The compound sat 40 minutes outside the city, behind 2 sets of gates and a private road that didn't appear on any map Maya had ever seen. It looked from the outside like an unremarkable estate. Gray stone, ivy climbing one wall, the kind of old money architecture that suggested generational wealth rather than criminal enterprise. Inside, it was something else entirely. Bulletproof glass disguised as ordinary windows, a server room behind a door that looked like a pantry, and enough armed men in the surrounding grounds that Maya stopped trying to count them after the first 10. She sat now at a long table in what had once probably been a formal dining room, except every inch of the table was covered in printed financial records, wire transfers, shell company registrations, currency conversion logs going back nearly 2 years. Kang Min-Jae sat across from her, sleeves rolled up, a glass of water he hadn't touched sitting at his elbow. Director Oh stood near the window, arms folded, watching Maya with an expression that had softened only slightly since the garage. "Start wherever makes sense to you," Min-Jae said. "Pretend I know nothing about finance. I want to understand exactly what he did and exactly how he thought he could get away with it." Maya pulled the nearest stack of paper toward her, scanning quickly, the old rhythms of forensic analysis returning to her like a language she'd never actually forgotten, only set aside. "Okay," she said. "First thing. This isn't one scheme. It's at least 3, layered on top of each other, probably built up over years so that no single piece looks suspicious by itself." She separated the documents into rough piles as she spoke. "Layer 1 is the currency conversion skimming I told you about at the restaurant. Small percentages shaved off every international transfer. That's the easiest to hide and probably the oldest part of the operation." She slid a second stack forward. "Layer 2 is these shell companies, I count at least 6 so far, registered in Luxembourg, Cyprus, and the Cayman Islands, all of them supposedly providing consulting services to your legitimate businesses. Real companies don't bill like this. She pointed to a column of figures. Look, identical invoice amounts submitted on the same day of the month, every month for 18 months straight. Nobody provides exactly the same consulting work for exactly the same fee, indefinitely. This is a laundering mechanism. Money goes out as a consulting fee, gets parked in the shell company, then gets moved again somewhere harder to trace. Director O finally spoke. How much through these shell companies? Maya did rough math against the columns, murmuring numbers under her breath, fingers moving down the page. Conservatively, around 220 million. Possibly closer to 250 once you account for the ones I haven't found documentation for yet. The room went very quiet. $220 million. Min-Jae repeated very softly, as though testing whether saying it aloud would make it more or less believable. That's layer 2, Maya said. Layer 3 is worse. She pulled out the final stack. Pages she'd found buried near the bottom of the box Tai Sung had retrieved from Luke's office safe after they'd forced the combination from his terrified assistant over the phone. These aren't shell companies feeding money out, Maya said. These are real companies, legitimate, operating businesses, the kind that file real tax returns and employ real people. That Luke has been quietly acquiring partial ownership stakes in, using the laundered money as capital. A logistics company in Rotterdam, a commodities trading firm in Singapore, a private security contractor based out of Dubai. She looked up. He wasn't just stealing from you to get rich, Min-Jae. He was building something, an entire independent infrastructure funded by your own money that doesn't answer to you at all. Building it for what purpose? Director O demanded. I don't know yet, Maya admitted. But you don't quietly acquire a logistics company, a trading firm, and a private security contractor on 3 different continents, unless you're planning to move things. Money, goods, maybe people, without anyone being able to trace where they came from or where they're going. That's not embezzlement anymore. That's infrastructure for something much bigger than skimming a percentage off currency conversions. Min-Jae sat back slowly in his chair, rubbing one hand across his jaw, processing the scale of what had just been laid in front of him. For 9 years, he had trusted Luc Moreau with the financial architecture of an empire built across decades, and in that time, Luc had apparently been quietly constructing a parallel empire of his own, funded entirely by theft, so well disguised, it had taken a waitress with a forgotten accounting degree 3 weeks to notice it. You said yesterday that the dying man in the garage told you Luke isn't the real mastermind, Min-Jae said. Do you believe him? Maya considered the question carefully before answering. I think Luke is smart enough to build a financial scheme like this. I don't think he's smart enough or connected enough to coordinate 2 armed assaults on a target as protected as you in the same night. That takes operational planning. Intelligence on your security patterns, your schedule, your locations. That takes someone with resources beyond an accountant's salary, even an accountant stealing $200 million. So someone is using him, Min-Jae said. Or working with him as an equal partner, Maya said. Or he was working for someone the whole time, and the embezzlement was never really his idea in the first place. Director O made a low, frustrated sound. Then who? It was at that exact moment, as if summoned by the question itself, that one of the junior bodyguards knocked sharply on the door and entered without waiting for permission, which Maya had already learned, in her short time around this organization, was never a good sign. Min-Jae Nim, the young man said, slightly out of breath. We just received a call. It's Moreau. He's locked in a basement 2 floors beneath us, Director O said flatly. How is he making calls? Not him calling us, the bodyguard clarified. Someone calling on his behalf. They want to arrange a meeting. They said—" He hesitated, glancing at Maya before continuing. "They said Mr. Moreau is willing to explain everything in exchange for guarantees about his safety, and they specifically requested that the waitress be present." Maya felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though she didn't move from her chair. "They asked for me by name?" "They asked for the woman who exposed him," the bodyguard said. "I assumed that meant you." Min-Jae's expression had gone hard and unreadable, the warmth of the last hour replaced by something colder, more calculating. "This is wrong," he said. "Moreau doesn't have the standing to negotiate terms from a locked basement. Someone above him is making this call, someone who believes they still have leverage." "What leverage could they possibly have?" Director O asked. "We hold Moreau. We hold the evidence. We hold every advantage." Min-Jae was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in his mind that he clearly didn't like the shape of. "Unless," he said slowly, "the leverage isn't something they have. It's something they know about someone in this room." The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it that night. It had weight. Maya watched Min-Jae's eyes move slowly around the table, to Director O, to Tae-sung standing near the door, to the two other senior men who'd been present for most of the evening's revelations, and understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, that Kang Min-Jae had just begun, in real time, to suspect every person in that room. "Min-Jae Nim," Director O said carefully, "you cannot possibly believe—" "I believe," Min-Jae said in a voice gone quiet and dangerous, "that 2 attempts were made on my life tonight by people with detailed knowledge of my security protocols, my schedule, and the layout of a private parking garage that only a handful of trusted people have access to. I believe my accountant of 9 years was planning my execution and somehow felt safe enough to laugh about it on a phone call he assumed no one could understand." His gaze swept the room once more, slow and merciless. "So no, Director, I do not think it is unreasonable to wonder, tonight of all nights, exactly who else in my organization has been quietly building something behind my back." Nobody in the room moved. Maya, sitting at the center of a conversation that had nothing directly to do with her, and everything to do with her survival, found herself doing what she'd done at Maison Dorée for 3 years running, watching, cataloging, noticing the things people tried to hide. And she noticed that when Min-Jae's eyes passed over one particular man, a quiet, gray-haired senior advisor named Han Seok-won, who had said almost nothing all evening and had positioned himself, Maya now realized, closer to the door than anyone else in the room. Something flickered across the older man's face for less than a second. It was so brief that she might have imagined it. Almost anyone would have missed it. But Maya had spent 3 years training herself to catch exactly the kind of detail that everyone else missed, and what she'd seen in that single unguarded fraction of a second was unmistakable. Fear, followed immediately, deliberately, by the careful, practiced blankness of a man who had spent decades learning how to hide exactly what he was feeling. She didn't say anything yet. She filed it away, the same way she'd filed away currency discrepancies and printer jams 3 weeks ago, and waited for more evidence before she trusted her own instincts enough to speak. She would not have to wait long. 2 hours later, alone in a guest room with a lock on the inside that Tae-sung had personally checked twice, Maya finally allowed herself to sit down on the edge of the bed and process what her life had become in the span of a single evening. 8 hours ago, she had been refilling water glasses, invisible, anonymous, exactly the way the world preferred her. Now she was sitting in a fortified compound owned by a man feared across 3 states, having just helped uncover a $250 million embezzlement scheme that was apparently only the visible surface of something much larger, while somewhere in that same building, a man who might be a traitor sat in a meeting deciding what to do about her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Denise. "You okay? Heard the restaurant got shot up. Please tell me you're not still there." Maya stared at the message for a long time before responding. There was no way to explain any of this. The wire transfers, the gunfire, the shell companies, the man in the room whose fear had lasted exactly half a second too long. In a text message to a coworker who had begged her, less than a week ago, to mind her own business and walk away while she still could. "I'm safe," Maya typed finally. "I'll explain when I can. Don't worry about me." It was, she thought as she hit send, very possibly a lie. She had no idea whether she was actually safe. She had no idea whether the man with the half-second of fear on his face was about to walk into this very room and finish what the gunman in the parking garage had started. She thought about her mother, about the accounting degree she never finished, about every reasonable voice that had told her this wasn't her fight. Then she pulled the notebook she always carried in her bag, the same one with forensic formulas scrawled in the margins from a life she'd thought was over, and began, in the dim light of a guest room in a criminal kingpin's fortress, writing down everything she had noticed about Han Seok-wan. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like this video. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think, and it tells me to keep bringing you stories exactly like this one. Maya didn't sleep more than 90 minutes that night, and when morning light finally cut through the heavy curtains of the guest room, she had filled 4 pages of her notebook with everything she could remember about Han Seok-wan. The half-second of fear. His position near the door during the meeting. The fact, which she only now recalled clearly, that he'd excused himself for nearly 20 minutes during the chaos in the parking garage, claiming he needed to check on the security footage, despite the fact that Tae-sung had told her later that the security team handled all footage review and Han had no technical reason to be involved. She brought her notes downstairs and found Min-Jae already awake, sitting alone at the same long table from the night before, a cup of black coffee going cold in front of him, staring at nothing. "You look like you didn't sleep either," Maya said before she could stop herself. He glanced up, and for just a moment, the careful composure cracked enough that she saw something almost human underneath. Exhaustion, grief for a betrayal still being uncovered, the particular loneliness of a man who could trust almost no one in his own house. 9 years, he said quietly. Moreau worked for me for 9 years, and I never once suspected him of anything beyond ordinary greed. Now I'm sitting here wondering how many other people in this building have been lying to me for just as long. Maya hesitated, then slid her notebook across the table. "I think I might know who else is involved," she said. "I want to be clear, I'm not certain. But I noticed something last night that I can't explain away, and I think it's worth looking into before you trust this person with anything else." Min-Jae read through her notes slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached the part about Han Seok-wan's 20-minute absence during the garage shooting, something in his jaw tightened. "Han has been with me longer than Moreau," he said. 11 years. He was the one who recommended Moreau for the accountant position in the first place. The silence that followed that sentence stretched long enough that Maya understood she didn't need to say anything else. Min-Jae had already arrived, on his own, at the same uncomfortable conclusion she had. "I want surveillance on him," Min-Jae said finally, his voice gone flat and businesslike, the grief sealed back behind a door she suspected he rarely opened in front of anyone. Quietly. "I don't want him to know we suspect anything. If you're right, I want to understand the full scope of what he's done before I confront him. And if I'm wrong, then we'll have wasted a day of surveillance on a loyal man and he'll never know we doubted him." Min-Jae looked at her directly. Better that than the alternative. It took 3 days to confirm what Maya had suspected from a single half-second of fear. Han Seok-wan made 2 phone calls during that period to numbers that traced back to shell companies Maya had already flagged in Luke's financial records. Companies she'd assumed, until that moment, existed only to launder Min-Jae's stolen money outward. Instead, it turned out, they also served as a communication channel, allowing Han to coordinate with whoever sat above Luke Moreau in whatever larger structure was orchestrating all of this, without ever directly contacting Luke himself and risking a traceable connection. On the 3rd day, Taesung intercepted a courier delivering a sealed envelope to Han's private residence. Inside, instead of documents, was a flash drive containing detailed floor plans of 3 properties Min-Jae used regularly, including the very compound they were currently standing in. When Min-Jae confronted Han that evening, in a study lined with old books that Han himself had probably never read, the older man didn't bother denying it for long. He simply sat down heavily in a leather chair, looking suddenly far older than his 61 years, and said in a voice drained of all the careful neutrality he'd maintained for over a decade, "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Min-Jae. None of this was ever really about money. Moreau was small, a tool. I am also, in the grand scheme of this, a tool. There is someone above all of us, someone who has been quietly buying loyalty across 3 syndicates for years, and I made the mistake of thinking I could survive by being useful to them instead of fighting them." "Who?" Min-Jae demanded. Han laughed, a thin, bitter sound. "If I tell you that, they will kill my daughter before you can even get her a bodyguard. So no, I will not tell you who. But I will tell you this. They want what Moreau was building. The shipping company, the trading firm, the security contractor. Those weren't random acquisitions. They're a network, a way to move things across borders without anyone watching too closely. Drugs, weapons, people, whatever pays best, whenever it pays best. Moreau was building the infrastructure. Someone else is going to use it." "And tonight?" Maya said slowly, putting pieces together even as she spoke them aloud. "Moreau requested a meeting, with guarantees about his safety." Han looked at her properly for the first time, something like reluctant respect in his tired eyes. "He's going to try to trade information for his life. Whoever is above him will know that. Which means either they'll let him go through with the meeting because they still need him alive for now, or they'll use the meeting to eliminate the loose ends in one place," Min-Jae finished grimly. "Moreau, me, and the waitress who exposed everything." The meeting was set for the following night, at an abandoned waterfront warehouse that had once processed shipping containers before the company that owned it went bankrupt a decade earlier. Maya had argued more than once over the preceding 24 hours that she shouldn't be anywhere near it, that her usefulness had already been served, that there was no reason for a waitress with a half-finished accounting degree to walk into a meeting with armed men working for someone powerful enough to control 3 criminal syndicates at once. Min-Jae had disagreed. "You're the only person who can read the documents in real time," he told her, as they sat in the back of an armored car winding through dark, empty streets toward the waterfront. "Moreau will try to manipulate numbers to make himself seem more valuable than he is, to negotiate a better outcome for himself. I need someone who can catch it the instant it happens, not 3 days later when it no longer matters." "You could die tonight," Maya said. "I could die tonight." "Yes," Min-Jae agreed, without flinching from the truth of it. "But I have spent 11 years building something that is now being hollowed out from the inside by people I trusted, and I refuse to walk into the one chance I have to understand the full scope of it without the one person who has proven, twice now, that she sees things the rest of us miss." Maya didn't have an answer for that. She simply nodded, gripping the small leather folder of financial documents in her lap, and watched the warehouse lights grow closer through the windshield. The warehouse interior was vast and dim, lit only by a few work lights strung along exposed steel beams, casting long shadows across rusted shipping containers that hadn't moved in years. Luke Moreau stood near the center of the space, flanked by two men Maya didn't recognize, both armed, both watching the entrance with the alert stillness of professionals. Han Seok-wan had been brought along under guard, his hands bound loosely in front of him, his expression resigned rather than afraid. A man who had already accepted, Maya thought, that his life was likely ending soon, regardless of how tonight unfolded. Min-Jae's own men spread out along the perimeter, weapons visible but not raised, the careful choreography of two sides that desperately wanted to avoid the chaos of the previous attempts while remaining fully prepared for it. Min-Jae, Luke said, attempting a tone of casual confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you for coming. I had hoped we could speak as reasonable men. You tried to have me killed twice in one night, Min-Jae said evenly. I'm not sure what definition of reasonable you're working with. Business, Luke said, with a small, humorless smile. Nothing personal, I assure you. The opportunity presented itself, and I would have been foolish not to consider it. But that opportunity has clearly passed, and I am a practical man. I would like to discuss what happens next. You're offering information, Min-Jae said, in exchange for your life. I'm offering, Luke corrected, the location of every account I've established over the past 2 years. $40 million, conservatively, sitting in accounts you have no way of finding without my help. In exchange, I walk away. No retaliation, no pursuit. Min-Jae's expression didn't change. And if I simply have my men extract that information from you by other means, then you'll spend months chasing accounts I've structured specifically to be untraceable without the keys only I possess, Luke said, with the first genuine confidence he'd shown since the conversation began. I assure you, Min-Jae Nim, I am better at hiding money than your people are at finding it. That has, after all, been rather thoroughly demonstrated. Maya, standing slightly behind Min-Jae's left shoulder, had been quietly reviewing the documents Luke's men had passed across as a show of good faith. Supposed account summaries, meant to prove the scale of what he was offering. She'd been scanning them for the better part of 2 minutes when something caught her eye that made her pulse spike with sudden, sharp recognition. It was so small that anyone without her training would have skimmed past it entirely. A decimal point shifted one place to the left in a column labeled Account Reference, Geneva, making a number that should have read 47.302 instead display as 4.7302. An honest typo on its face. Except Maya had now seen this exact pattern of deliberate, almost invisible misdirection from Luke Moreau 3 times before. In the wire transfer she'd glimpsed weeks ago, in the currency conversion logs, in a column of fake consulting invoices. He buried real information inside small, deniable errors, readable only to someone who knew precisely what they were looking for. She leaned close to Min-Jae's ear, the same way she had at the restaurant the night this had all begun, and whispered just 4 words. He's hiding the location. Min-Jae's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Luke, and something in his posture shifted. The subtle readiness of a predator who has just realized the prey in front of him has made one mistake too many. There's a decimal error, Min-Jae said aloud, watching Luke's face carefully as he spoke. On your Geneva reference. Luke's confident smile faltered for the first time. A clerical mistake, nothing more. Funny, Min-Jae said. My associate tells me you don't make clerical mistakes. She tells me you bury real numbers inside fake ones, the same way you've done in every other document we've recovered from your office. He took a single step closer. Which means this error isn't an error at all. It's a coordinate, or a code, something you didn't intend to hand over so easily, but did, because you assumed nobody in this room would notice. For a long, suspended moment, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. If you've made it this far, the story's about to take its sharpest turn yet. Go ahead and share this video with someone who loves a good twist, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything. Luke Moreau's two guards reached for their weapons the instant Min-Jae spoke the word coordinate, which told Maya everything she needed to know about how accurate her guess had actually been. Min-Jae's men were faster. 3 shots cracked through the cavernous warehouse space before either of Luke's guards cleared their holsters, and both men went down hard against the concrete, weapons skittering uselessly away from outstretched hands. Luke bolted. He ran with the desperate, ungainly speed of a man who had spent 9 years behind a desk rather than in any kind of physical condition, scrambling between rusted shipping containers in a panicked attempt to disappear into the warehouse's tangle of shadows. 2 of Min-Jae's men gave chase immediately, boots ringing against concrete, shouts echoing off corrugated steel walls. Han Seok-won, still bound and guarded, watched the chaos with an expression of weary resignation. "He won't get far," he said quietly, almost to himself. He never had an exit plan. He was always going to be sacrificed eventually. Men like our employer don't keep tools around once they've served their purpose. "Your employer," Min-Jae said sharply, rounding on him. "You'll give me a name now, or what?" Han said, with something almost like exhausted relief in his voice. "Kill me?" "At this point, Min-Jae, that might genuinely be the kinder outcome. My daughter is already as good as dead the moment they realize I've been caught. A bullet from you would simply save them the trouble of doing it themselves." Whatever Min-Jae might have said in response was cut short by a sudden commotion near the warehouse's eastern wall. Shouting, a scuffle, and then the unmistakable, desperate sound of Luke Moreau being dragged back into the light, one arm twisted painfully behind him, his expensive shirt torn at the collar. "Let me go!" he was shouting, voice cracking with panic. "You don't understand what you're doing! They'll kill all of us! You don't know who you're dealing with!" "Then tell us," Min-Jae said, stepping directly into his line of sight. "And perhaps we can deal with them together, instead of separately." It was, Maya realized, watching the exchange unfold, a genuinely clever offer. Not mercy exactly, but a recognition that a frightened, cornered man with nothing left to lose might finally talk, if given even a sliver of reason to believe cooperation served his survival better than silence. Luke's eyes darted between Min-Jae's face and the dark muzzle of the gun still trained loosely in his direction. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, all at once, something in him seemed to collapse. The careful arrogance finally giving way entirely to plain, undisguised fear. "His name is Director Sato," Luke said, the words tumbling out fast now, as though he'd been holding them back for years and the dam had simply given way. "Tatsuo Sato. Officially, he runs a logistics conglomerate based in Singapore. Unofficially, he has spent the last 6 years quietly consolidating influence across syndicates in 4 countries, buying loyalty, eliminating rivals, building exactly the kind of cross-border network you saw in those shipping and trading companies. I was never working against you for myself, Min-Jae. I was working for him. Everyone was working for him. He doesn't want your money. He wants your territory, your contacts, your entire operation folded quietly into something far larger than either of us ever imagined." Maya watched Min-Jae absorb this, watched the slow, grim recalculation happening behind his eyes. The realization that the conspiracy he'd spent 4 days unraveling wasn't an isolated betrayal at all, but a single visible thread in something far larger. Something that had already, perhaps, consumed organizations far more powerful than his own. "Where can I find him?" Min-Jae asked. "You can't," Luke said, with the bitter certainty of a man who'd glimpsed the scope of what he'd been part of. "Not directly, not yet. He's surrounded by enough buffers and shell entities that reaching him would take years, even with everything your waitress has already uncovered." He looked briefly, almost helplessly, toward Maya. "But the encrypted ledger, the one you found in my safe, the one neither of you have been able to open, that contains his entire network. Every name, every account, every syndicate he's compromised. If you can break that encryption, you wouldn't just stop him. You could expose the entire structure. Maya's stomach tightened. She hadn't mentioned the ledger to anyone outside the inner circle. A small, heavily encrypted drive she'd found wedged beneath a false bottom in Luke's office safe, which none of Min-Jae's technical people had managed to crack in 3 days of trying. "How do you know about that?" she asked. "Because I built it," Luke said simply. Sato required detailed records of everyone he'd compromised as insurance against his own partners turning on him eventually. "I was the one who assembled it. I know exactly what's inside, and I know exactly how dangerous it is to whoever holds it." He met Maya's eyes with something that, for the first time all evening, resembled genuine respect rather than contempt. "You should be very careful with what you found, Ms. Brooks. That ledger could expose financiers, customs officials, even a handful of elected officials across 3 countries. Powerful people have killed for far less than what's sitting on that drive." The encrypted ledger, it turned out, took another 6 days to crack. 6 days during which Maya barely left the compound, working alongside a young cybersecurity specialist Min-Jae trusted, piecing together fragments of password structure from patterns she recognized in Luke's other documents. When the file finally opened, late on a Thursday night, the scale of what spilled across the screen silenced the room entirely. Dozens of names, financial trails spanning Tokyo, Singapore, Marseille, and 3 American cities, evidence of bribes paid to officials in 2 different countries, and at the center of it all, exactly as Luke had described, a man named Tatsuo Sato, presiding over a web far larger and more dangerous than Kang Min-Jae's organization alone. What Min-Jae chose to do with that information over the following months was not, strictly speaking, Maya's business anymore. Though she would later hear, in fragments and rumors and one brief, careful phone call from Director O, that quiet alliances had formed between several syndicates who suddenly discovered they shared a common, far more dangerous enemy, and that a man named Sato had vanished from public visibility entirely sometime that autumn. His Singapore conglomerate dissolved amid a flurry of international financial investigations that no journalist ever fully connected to organized crime. Luke Moreau was handed over, eventually, to federal investigators in a deal Maya never learned the full details of, though she suspected it had less to do with mercy and more to do with the value of a cooperating witness who could testify to financial crimes spanning multiple jurisdictions. Han Seok-won's fate remained something Min-Jae never discussed with her, and Maya, for her own peace of mind, chose not to ask. What she did learn, in the weeks that followed, was that Kang Min-Jae was a man of his word. He paid off the remainder of her mother's medical debt without being asked. He personally funded her return to college, covering not just tuition but the 11 credits and the 2 years of catching up she'd need to finish the degree she'd abandoned. And when she graduated, 18 months later, with the same forensic accounting concentration she'd once dreamed of, sitting near the back of a ceremony she'd genuinely earned, she found a single, simple note waiting in her mailbox that evening, unsigned except for 2 initials. You were right about the smallest numbers. KM, she never worked for him directly, not in any official sense. She made that boundary clear early on, and to his credit, he respected it without argument. But 3 years later, sitting in her own small office downtown, the gold lettering on the glass door reading Maya Brooks, Forensic Accounting and Fraud Investigation, she received a referral, completely unprompted, for a corporate client needing a discreet audit of suspicious currency discrepancies in their international transfers. She never asked who'd recommended her. She had a fairly strong guess. Years later, invited to speak to a room full of accounting and criminal justice students at a university not unlike the one she'd once left behind, A young man near the front row raised his hand during the question portion and asked the thing everyone always eventually asked. What made you actually say something? That night, you could have just kept quiet and none of it would have ever touched you. Maya considered the question for a long moment, the same way she'd learned to consider every number before trusting her read of it. I used to think power looked loud, she said finally. Bodyguards, money, fear, all of it makes noise, but the thing that actually changed everything that night wasn't loud at all. It was 4 pages of receipts nobody else bothered to look at twice, and one sentence whispered quietly enough that only the right person could hear it. She smiled, a little wryly. The biggest lies almost always hide in the smallest numbers. Most people just never slow down enough to notice. She didn't mention, because it wasn't really anyone's business, that 2 weeks earlier, eating dinner alone at a quiet restaurant across town, she'd watched a young waiter pause mid-step near a table where a well-dressed man was very carefully, very quietly altering figures on a printed invoice before a client arrived. The waiter hadn't said anything. Not yet. But Maya had seen, in the brief, careful way he glanced at the numbers a second time before walking away, that he'd noticed exactly what she once had. She left a generous tip that night, and on the receipt beneath her signature, she wrote 6 words she hoped he'd eventually understand the weight of. Trust what you notice. Speak up. If this story stayed with you the way I hope it did, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. There are more stories like Maya's waiting, and you really don't want to miss them.